Hi, it's Steve and Joe from Freshagenda, and Steve, with all the hair, we're here again to talk about the latest GDT events and a little bit of an update about what's going on in the world.
So that's a reference to the fact that we're still tightly locked down in Melbourne, can't get to a hairdresser, and a lot of other things for a couple of weeks. Joe, just a few little updates before we hit the GDT result. Some of the interesting data around the world, and the things we're watching, I guess, are the mixed impacts of weather.
Yeah, it is quite a mixed bag, isn't it?
West coast of the US burning up. We have Europe in quite a flux. We've got plenty of water in some regions, some drying out going on in others, and seeing milk move around quite a bit in terms of year-on-year changes. And New Zealand in a cracking start of season, similar to here, I guess, in southern parts here, where there's been good rainfall, but some risks down the track.
Yeah, certainly with La Nina in force. Good for Australia, not so good for New Zealand, and Australia off to a reasonable start too, for what it's worth.
So the comparison of spot prices this week globally, that takes the GDT result into account. And I think the one that's, we understand the cheese situation in the US, which is in its usual manic state. But butter's the one I think is pretty complex. We've got a tight, stable market in Europe. As you can see, pushed values right up.
Yep.
New Zealand way exposed to the weak trade into food service uses.
Yeah.
And the US suffering the same thing, but in a different dimension. I guess the excess cream that's and we're seeing butter stocks increase quite a bit. So over to Europe, we also had a download of their product mix data for July. So there's a bit of history, but some pretty interesting numbers, particularly the July bars there.
Yeah, skim and butter and cream coming back strong.
Yeah, so you expect that in summer with hot weather that cream is going to be in strong demand. Pulled quite a bit of fat away from butter, so butter barely moved. It rose just 0.5%.
But that skim line is a real jump.
It is, and we did see weekly data out of a few regions, but that's a little bit of a surprise that it's that strong year on year. Beware, there could be a revision. We saw revisions in prior month data, so that may not be a real number. But
yeah, one to watch.
Yeah, it's double-digit gains in a few countries, so yeah, as you said, that's one to keep an eye on. In the US, domestic demand shows that the butter has hit the wall there.
Yeah, that's probably quite messy.
Part of that complexity we talked about. So we've seen really strong growth, the best domestic category for dairy for the last few months, as we went through the worst impacts of COVID, and then it's sort of slowed.
Has everyone stopped cooking at home?
I reckon they got sick of it. Yeah. So, yeah, that's in the system, and how to we digest that as to its impact on the global balance.
Yeah, but it's quite a stark change, isn't it?
It is. Oops, GDT. A
positive result, very positive.
Hugely positive.
In the context of things.
Yeah, the world hasn't got COVID under control. It's way out of control in several parts of Europe, several parts of the US. Large populous other countries they're in deep trouble with this, and yet in the Oceania dairy market, it's all good.
Yeah, that probably reflects Asia and how well, comparatively speaking, Asia's handled the situation.
Yeah, I think that's the message.
Yeah, so strong. We don't mean strong powder cheese gains. There's a comma missing there, but powder and cheese were fairly strong performers. And by exception, then, fat not so good.
So that typo is going to be on all the slides that come. The demand was a little better at this event, better than average. We're still down on average in the fats, that's for sure, but the demand side was good. Some interesting comparisons, though, when we see the effect of that mixed situation on fats.
Yeah.
That, butter and AMF are almost back into
into
parity.
alignment, yeah.
And also almost in alignment, we've got whole milk and skim milk powder just $100 apart.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting discussion when we see the theoretical value of whole milk powder being the sum of the fat and the protein, but the fact that we have probably weak demand from other regions. China's demand is, good, but we're not blowing the socks off the market.
Not at all.
So there's that cap on where whole milk can get to with the supply being still moving ahead in New Zealand. Yeah. The best story was skim milk powder. Very strong gains. That's an indicative chart at the top showing just the trends in North Asian buying.
Yeah.
So that's still very strong.
Continue to turn up, don't they?
Yeah. And demand was well above average. So naturally, through the event, that pulls the value up. When we look at whole milk, not as strong. You've got those countervailing forces. Rising Chinese milk prices making imports more competitive. And that's a country average, so there's a whole lot of different prices in behind that. Countervailed by the fact that there's still plenty of stocks that they're working through.
That's right, yeah. So certainly not panic stations, but
no.
Yeah, a few different forces there.
And butter, has it come off the floor? Well, we've certainly seen the forward prices level off.
It's flattened.
Taken those bumps out of early and later prices. So is that the bottom? That's and China certainly thinks so. They're buying. They bought quite a bit of that event. We'll see. And then we move to how skim milk powder compares, and the size of that GDT premium there. That's how the market actually takes that. Is that a short one off because the futures market's still showing a reasonable premium to what's going on in Europe and the US.
Yeah, but GDT did even better.
Yeah, a lot better. So one of the strongest premiums we've seen between New Zealand and European prices in this event. New Zealand price went up better than $160 a tonne. The European price actually fell at this event when everything else was moving. So
interesting.
Yeah, it is. And then we see cheese, very important to this industry, Australia, which is half its manufacturing milk going into cheese. That forward price, that American price levelling off, but the exposure, I guess, is not so much what's going on in blocks. If you took barrel prices in the US and put them on that chart, you'd see them being fairly similar. But we've got no barrel futures, so it's a little difficult to see that. But there we have a
convergence, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
And that's no doubt is what's keeping pressure on.
Sure.
Jar of the week, Jo, what have you got?
Yeah, this week, back to Europe and butter. Just had a bit of a look at what's happening with wholesale prices versus retail prices. So some cuts in retail prices in Germany, despite the fact that retailers are actually paying a bit more at wholesale, and just got a lovely picture of the German quality butter from the cooling there.
From the cooling, which is obviously a direct translation from the website. This is from the Aldi website. But this is the price that everyone's talking about, that the private label line, that's one of their private label brands, has been trending down with the cost of butter falling over time. But maybe this is a bit of a canary
in the gold mine.
Yeah, that the market is going to be pretty tough to move product. We understand there's quite a bit of brand competition in that market, and maybe it's the private label retailer prepared to sacrifice a bit of margin for share, but that's the tightest retail allowance we've seen for several years in tracking this month. This is like a weekly, this is a monthly comparison of what's coming out of the scan data. But yeah, that's an interesting one to watch.
Sure.
Okay. That's been a pretty quick wrap for us. Thanks for watching. We'll hopefully be back next week.